Hello everyone and welcome back to Dreamweaver. Today we're going to talk about the different methods to integrate images into our responsive website. So if we look at the code that I have now, I have a row and 4 columns within that row. I also have a CSS attached, so I have image demo.css, and I already have some column selectors already created. So if we test this in Safari, we can see what I'm starting with. I have 4 separate columns. They are all responsive. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to begin placing an image into my first column. So column 1. Now depending on the Dreamweaver that you're using, you know that you can click and drag from our file section, or we can simply go to insert image. Now if yours does not look like this, note that there are different things that you can choose from. As you can see here, I have quite a few different things that I can insert. Most of you don't have all of these. Some of these are powerful extensions that I've purchased. But if we select the HTML drop-down, we can see all of the basic HTML things that we can insert into our web page. And the second one down from that is an image. The first one you'll notice is a div, which all of you should know how to write by now. So in this case, I'm going to select image. I'm going to select this ocean image that I downloaded today. And now I have this ocean image in my website. Now one of the things that we talked about in a previous demo is how that we can change the size through the width and height in our HTML code. But instead of doing that, I'm going to eliminate that altogether, because I want to be able to determine my width and height through my CSS coding. Now one of the things that we have not discussed yet is the alt text. Now what this is this is essentially an alternative to the image, which is going to be used for people who are blind or hard of seeing, and this enables their website readers to be able to read them the content. And so it's not going to be able to determine what the image is. So what it does instead is it reads the alt text to that individual. So in this case, it is an ocean wave, and so I will call it ocean wave. So now when a website reader scans over that image, it will read out the word ocean wave to the individual who is blind and using that website reader. So now I'm going to go to my CSS Designer, and I'm going to set up a CSS rule for my image. So I'm going to simply hit create a selector. So I have row 1, column 1, IMG for image. Down here on the bottom in my properties bar, I see that I have my background, more, border, text, and so forth. If you do not see this, make sure that the show set is either checked or unchecked. In the case of unchecked, you're going to be able to see all of this. For those of you who are whizzes at writing CSS, you can simply check that box and you can actually type it all in and add the value yourself. Hopefully by the time you get to Web 2, you will be able to do that. So what I need to do now is I need to set up this image to have a 100% width and a height set to auto. So now if I preview this in Safari, we're going to see that the image takes up 100% of the width of column 1. And no matter what size column 1 is, my image will shrink to fit 100% of column 1. Now this is method 1 for integrating an image into our site. Method 2 gives us a little bit more control over our image, as well as allows us to use other items within a column. So in this case, I'm going to create a container to contain my image. Now this container is going to simply be another div. As you can see here, I have image container 1. I have the opening and closing tag. Now containers can be used for all sorts of web design, and depending on what book you read, in some cases where you see row 1, column 1, row 1 is actually called container 1, and then row 2 would be container 2. Typically it's a little bit easier to understand from a student standpoint, to understand them in rows and columns, especially since most of you are used to working in the grid format for print anyway. So I can see now that I have this container. I'm going to insert an image into there again. Just like before, I'm going to get rid of that width and height. I'm going to place in the alt text. Like before. Now I need to create two selectors, one for my image container, and then one to tell my image to resize itself to that image container. So the first one that I'm going to create is just going to be for image container 1. I'm going to set its width to be approximately 50% of column 2. The height I'm going to set to auto so that my image can fill that void. Actually, better yet, let's set that to, well, we'll leave it at auto. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another selector. This one is for the image that's going to be within that container. So now I can see I have column 2, image container 1, img. And in this case, I'm going to set it to a percentage, but I need it to be 100%. And so this way it's going to take up 100% of that image container, which is 50% of column 2. Once again, I'm going to set that to auto and height. And now let's test it in Safari. Alright, if we take a look at this in Safari, we can see that I have the first one set up. Now we can see we have that second image of the wave. It is taking up approximately 50%. And no matter what size, it's going to be taking up 50%. Now because this is only taking up 50% of this container, we can also now set margins to center this into the center of this container. And that's what I'll do now. So I can see I have my container 1 image, and then I have my container 1. Now it's my container 1 that I want to move, not my image. So my container 1, with it selected, I'm going to come down into its properties, and we'll notice we have this area here for margin. I'm going to set both of these, both left and right, for auto. Now what that's going to do is it's going to automatically determine what is the equal space on the left and the right, thus centering that image in the space. So with that set, let us test it once again in Safari. We can see now that it is centered within that container. Now if I wanted to, I could also give it a margin off the top, and if I was going to have a paragraph underneath it, I could give it a margin on the bottom to keep the words from getting too close. So that is going to be method 2 for how to enter an image into our responsive website. Personally, I tend to use this image container quite a bit, and if you study my code, you'll probably see this a good bit on my current website. Now this next method utilizes a max width setting inside of our CSS. So in this case, for column 3, I'm going to import another image. So I'm going to go to Insert, Image. In this case, I'm going to select this one called drawing.jpg. Now I'm selecting this one because notice that currently it is set to 200 by 200 pixels. So I've placed that in here, and just as I've done before, I'm going to remove the height and width. And I'm going to type in some alt text for that image. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my CSS Designer, and I'm going to create a selector for this column 3 image. And I'm going to go to my layout. Notice here that we have max width and max height. So the max width I'm going to put as 100%. Now what that's going to do is that's going to make my image shrink, but that means it's also not going to get any larger than its original size. So currently it's 200 pixels. So that means no matter what size my screen is, it will not get any larger than the 200 pixels that it is set at. And then for height, once again, we're going to place in auto. So now if we test this in Safari, we see that I have my 2 oceans, and then I have my drawing image. Now notice as I resize that it stays 200 pixels until it is forced to shrink. Now this too is a method that's commonly used for responsive web design. Notice right now though that our image isn't centered. Okay, for column 4, what we're going to do is we're going to do something very similar with the max width, but this time we're going to utilize the max width within an image container. So I'm going to simply copy this image container div ID that I have here. Place that into my column 4. Make sure that I create a closing for it. And I'm going to place an image within it. Okay, so now that I've gotten rid of my HTML width and height, I need to go to my CSS Designer and begin to create the image containers for those. As you can see here, I've got an image container one set up here. I'm going to set the width, just as we did before, to 50%. The height's going to be set to auto, and then I'm going to set that margin to auto and auto. Then I'm going to set up yet another selector for my image that's inside that container, which I have already done here. And I've set that height to auto and that max width to 100%. Some of you may be wondering how I already had that in here. That's because I actually went into the code here and simply copied and pasted from the one that we had done before. Okay, so now that we have that set up, let's give it a look-see. And you can see here that we have some of the same things happening. So we have our image set up here. And it's shrinking. Now the difference between this one and this one is that in the case of column 2, this image is going to continue to grow even on a larger screen. On a larger screen, this image is going to stop once it gets to this size, because this is the 200 by 200 pixel size. And so once it gets to this size, it will stop growing. So one of the things that some of you may have noticed in class is during some of the demonstrations, when a small image is placed within a div and it's called upon to be larger, it will pixelate. The max width helps prevent that from happening. However, if your image is typically larger and we resize it down to be inside of our image container, we're typically not going to run into that problem. Alright, this concludes your responsive image demo. Our next demo is going to be where we begin to work slightly into media queries. So I hope you guys are doing your demos as you've been told, and you're doing them multiple times so that they should come pretty easy to you. I hope this was helpful. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me, and I'll answer any questions that you have.